Mike, great to see you again. Thanks for joining our podcast.
Absolutely, Ben. Good to see you.
I'm really excited because you've had such a wealth of experience, with direct-to-consumer brands, both on the investing side and building them and the strategy side. And I think it would be super helpful if you just give a little bit more background about Bullish, because you do operate in kind of both spheres of investing and strategy.
Sure. So Bullish is an early stage consumer, U.S.-based consumer investor at the pre-seed, seed, and now Series A round, since we're almost done raising a $60 million vehicle. We've been at it for 11 years before it was cool. Lucky enough to be the first investors in likes of Birchbox, Peloton, Casper, Harry's, Warby Parker, Function Beauty, Hue Chocolate, Sunday Lawn, and a number of others. And probably what makes this unique is that this is the only investment job I've ever had. My career was spent as a marketer for 20 years, and I love marketing and brands and branding along those lines. And the incentive or the motivation to do this is I was starting to realize that Wall Street was looking at us people in marketing as an expense, something that's easily cut if we're going into a downturn or downtimes or the business isn't doing well. And one of the last budget areas to be restored. I'm like, ooh, I don't like that. But where Wall Street was kind of right is like marketing agencies, their economics are like a law firm. You charge an hourly rate to create outputs, but those outputs are not necessarily tied to outcomes. So we said, okay, point taken, Wall Street. What if we created an investing company or an investment firm that literally put its money behind its marketing? And so we will invest in the earliest stages behind great entrepreneurs that are better serving the consumer, and DTC has been such a big part of that. And then we bring something else to the table. In fact, we think money is the least valuable thing we bring to the table, but we bring brand management, consumer insight, and a number of things related to that we think, when aligned, is an asset and an accelerant versus what is an expense. So it's a lot of fun. We've had our mistakes, we've had our great times, and I think the next few years are going to be great, but not without its challenges.
I love the putting your efforts behind your money, right? I love that combination. And I love how you're talking about marketing as opposed to like customer acquisition or paid advertising. And, in my experience, the world of D2C got way too focused on paid acquisition, running ads, the sort of quick hits, and not enough focus on marketing. I think we're seeing brands kind of a bit of a reckoning now. When you say marketing, and what does that mean to you? Because it means a gazillion things to people.
Yeah, it's and by the way, good for you for let's go to the basics here. Like marketing is like an act of trying to potential customers to your brand, your business, to get them to buy or some sort of trial based on what the nature of the business is. To your point, to the early stage community for the past 5 or 6 years, marketing is overly equated to Google and Facebook marketing,
right?
Digital acquisition. And that is a part of the marketing funnel, but it's not the marketing funnel. As I will say to the cows come home, no sane human being on earth spends all her time on Google or Facebook. There's different parts of the journey, no matter what category you're in. Amazon is an exception. It's interesting. 74% of all consumer purchase searches start within Amazon, not Google. And as much as I love brand and marketing, I don't know if people are looking for the best brand in a shower curtain. But for so many different consumer categories, of which there's well over 200, it's just there's different parts of the journey along the way. And given that the average person in the U.S. is exposed to something like 8,000 media messages a day in advertising, it's just where you can intercept them or participate is so critical with the right kind of message. But too much it has been placed on digital acquisition, and while in many ways iOS 14 plus is not a lot to celebrate for most people, it's I'm not gonna lie, there's a little bit of a hallelujah from me saying this is a return to good old fashioned strategy. And the more you know who your customer is, the better you can serve her and keep her, because CAC is something that's overrated with us, at least. We focus so much on the acquisition, but not on the retention.
Yeah.
And so we have a lot of leaky buckets that have been kind of artificially plugged by just the raw amount of capital that's gone in. So this is, for all the things going on in the economy and post iOS 14, it's actually going to do, it's going to up the game, and that you just can't do things as easy anymore.
Oh man, I love the leaky bucket analogy and the emphasis.
It's old school, right? It's like, I don't know if people use it anymore. I don't know if that's lost on the on if you're under 30, but it's like leaky bucket, which refers to like if you get customers, are they going out the side door or out of the bucket? Like it's like when you fill up a bucket of water, it's ideally you keep the water versus have it go out before you even use it.
Right.
So.
And paid advertising was effectively super cheap water, and so people were like, well, I'll just pour more in. I don't care if it's leaking. And I think people just don't spend enough time on like, you've already acquired this customer. How do you get them to buy again from you? It's not really, the focus is so much on like getting the next customer and all that, kind of growth. And how do you think about that? Like, how do you advise brands to think about that?
I think it's like not all companies are created equal. And certainly, taking a way step back, capitalism really hasn't failed too many people over the past several years, and yet certainly we have poverty and all those things. But when you look at like the venture capital game, the incentive for everybody is grow faster, fund faster, fundraise more and more often. And that's true with the venture capitalists that are making like going to market with like new and bigger funds quicker than ever on mostly mark to mark. And it's true of businesses that are like up and to the right. It happen as quick as possible and keep getting money to fuel it. So it's the most it's the craziest game of like musical chairs at like such an expeditious like rate, if you will. And then all of a sudden, the music really stopped. People couldn't find chairs, and that's why we're going through a tremendous reset now. So to more pointedly answer your question, some entrepreneurs, I want $1 billion company in 5 years, and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Others realize the goal is not to raise capital. It's to build a sustainable, or we call viable business. And so while we have brands like Casper and others that are maybe anointed with the DTC explosion, we're seeing entrepreneurs now slightly older, and I don't want to say more pragmatic, but they're more like the camels than the unicorns. And unicorns, like there's over 1,000 unicorns now, companies worth over $1 billion. Now we're seeing camels, like people like that are conserving the capital they raise to build a strong company. And we had 4 exits in 2021 as a fund, and one of the exits was about a $50 million company, sold for not profitable, sold for $410 million, and us and our investors made 10 times our money in 48 months. And so what excites us, one, about the early stage asset class is power law, but two, it's like great consumer propositions can like be thriving in a need, and you don't need an IPO. Right. And in a world where like funds are raising at an all-time high, or have been, that music has stopped. It's all about business viability, and the direct consumer model is absolutely a viable portion of how to keep doing it. But I think, like anything else, we like simple narratives, whether it's all DTC or screw DTC. And I think where we're learning, it's just like, it's not quite as simple as that. But we're seeing a sobering element of it. So to go back to your question again, is we like certain companies that want to be $1 billion company, it might be a different element than to someone who wants to go just build something viable and isn't necessarily looking to build a unicorn. The whole point is, at the end of the game, in this entrepreneur VC game, is do we have a productive liquid event? And there's multiple ways to do that now, but it's we're going to see more the example I had with the 10x as much as the IPO, especially in the DTC and consumer world.
Mike, when you say people are trying to build viable business, like I would think the acid test of that is profitability. So if you're not profitable, like, can you be viable and not be profitable, I guess is my question.
It's a good pushback. So viable, like, again, we invest pre-launch and at the seed stage. Venture capital exists to give promising proposition to their founders, like the economic means and maybe some other value-added things beyond, to make sure that you can actually show proof of concept and get it. So viability for us is usually high gross margin businesses. They have a better customer satisfaction point or something better in the consumer journey, is offering a solution or a benefit that that category doesn't have, or is taking advantage of the internet or some way, shape, or form, and has a destination is
Yeah.
destined to be profitable. You can get profitable out of the gate, but you
Right.
won't grow. And so, for a lot of companies, it just we've over celebrated perhaps.
Yeah. That's great. I appreciate that clarification. You talked about high margin, and at Bainbridge we talk to a lot of companies also, and I'm struck. Sometimes you see great margin structures, and sometimes you see margin structures which are questionable. Like, how are you ever going to get profitable? And I can understand. Oh, with more scale, I can bring down cogs and things. But I suspect that sometimes founders don't put enough thought into the margin structure of their business, especially over time. And you basically are then putting yourself in a situation of, how are you ever going to get there, right? How do you see founders, like, I mean, do you counsel founders on the right margin structure, or by default are those the only ones you ever work with, the ones that have already kind of figured this out?
So it's more the default, it's more the latter on that side of the equation. That we tend to like higher margin businesses better because then you can just do more within that. And that doesn't mean they have to be the highest margin in
Yeah.
their category. It doesn't mean they have to be like, Lens Crafters was a virtual monopoly before we saw Warby Parker, and their gross margins were something like 70%. And Warby Parker set out with only 40 to 50% gross margins because they wanted to show how the internet, they wanted to provide a better service for customers, and getting glasses at Luxottica and Lens Crafters was like, oh my god, it was more than an iPhone, which was really insights. And when you see when Warby Parker IPO, their gross margins were 69 and a half, or sorry, 59 and a half, and Luxottica's was 60. So over time, that's a business that actually showed by owning their supply chain and doing things, they actually grew their gross margin base. But a 40 to 50% was
Right.
nothing to sneeze at back then. The category income was 70. So, like when you see things like retailers, like the WalMarts and the Targets of the world, it's just like if you look at their revenue and if you look at the profit margin, it's like look. So those aren't things that we aspire to invest in per se, even though they can be certainly viable as part of the overall. Uh, if someone decides to go beyond DTC at some point, but it's like yeah, gross margins have to come into it, and so it's not something we
Yeah.
advise our entrepreneurs are because it's got to be inherently baked in. And listen, if the pandemic hasn't taught us much about anything, it just shows you if you have supply chain issues or scarcity issues along that, those are things that you might have to borrow against those high gross margins. You'd rather have higher ones than lower ones, which is economics like maybe 90, not even 101. But we tend to favor businesses that there's more room to play. Um, and listen, in the very beginning stages, there are things you can do early on that aren't maybe the most scalable, but that's okay too. I mean, not necessarily from the economic model, but it might be over servicing your first 1,000 customers and getting the word out because you're still getting feedback. That's the great thing about TTC, the feedback loop that can help fuel the future of the company over the course of time. So there's probably loads we could talk about DTC beyond the business model approach. It offers advantages that just I think we've forgotten to talk about over the past couple of years.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. What are some of those other advantages? There's the feedback loop, the ability to make changes quickly and execute faster than a traditional wholesaling business. What other advantages would you see, or do you think good founders are taking advantage of?
Those are two great ones. Customer service is another thing, but
Mm,
we say like DTC, and taking a step back, we love founders that are super passionate about solving a problem and literally want to burn the boats to do that, so to speak, go all in. But they're paranoid as to what, like, if we don't do it right, someone else is going to take her dollar. And I don't mean paranoid in any negative mental health way by
right.
any stretch, not at all. But paranoid in terms of like that obsessing over customer service. And when
Yeah.
you have a direct feedback loop, not only in the sales channel, but also you can go back, like, write us back if there's any issues or whatever. Like some of our greatest multi-billion-dollar brands, those founders were like in the customer service centers because they were in the office, not outsourced outside
Yeah.
the U.S. They were in this, listening to what their customers said. And when we see founders do that, and founding teams do that, Customer service can be far more weaponized to have good than what digital acquisition is. Because if you listen to your customers, you can provide her and him with what they need and like, ooh, tweak that. We think
Right.
the direct consumer and the feedback model is certainly part of it. Just abiding by those principles and like going by it, it'll help you achieve product culture fit quicker, not product market fit. Product market can be a science eyes or math eyes. Like when we talk to founders and we ask like who's your target audience, and it's like, well, it's a 26 to 49-year-old female with an average household income of $78,000. It's like, well, I've never met a 26 to 49-year-old female. So we want to get more of a who is that person or who are you for. And it's not just like a media target like that
Yeah.
represents, but it's a psychographic. So for Birchbox, it was a 28-year-old mother of two in Cleveland that subscribed to the New Yorker. And that was a sense of her and where is she on her journey and that side of it. And so the great thing about DTC is like it really helps you establish that product culture fit and give you that. If you want to diversify one day and actually go into third party retail, which is not necessarily a bad thing, you know who your customer is. It's not based on Nielsen ratings, all these things that the standard CPG company's done. You actually have real data on who your customer is, when they buy, how often they buy, what more they come, all that. So that can actually help you go to where your customers need you. Customer service. Historically, customer service has been a negative and been a cost center. DTC companies realize customer service is a gift. You allow me to have a conversation, my day in court. Like if I fail you in some way, shape, or form, you give me a chance to make it right. Or if you're celebrating and you want to evangelize for it, go ahead. And we see that we study like Instagram, like people who follow who on Instagram and even now TikTok and Twitter, just what kind of fandom that exists there. And that's why like early stage DTC, God, it's so much fun.
Yeah.
And while we tend to obsess over CAC and we make up LTV numbers, is really the purity of that direct to consumer relationship, which has to lead to sales and all those things. But the learnings along the way can actually be the best investment versus having to spending a lot of money on wrongful marketing that's going against a customer that's not there for you or what have you. So that's why we love Paranoid Founders, because they use direct to consumer is like ongoing data and information that helps sculpt what products you might need, what products you should kill, or even like when we should market. So it's that's why DTC is just so good.
I think it's fast. This is great, and you're getting to the heart of something that I think is really interesting about D2C and brands. You gave the example of Birchbox, 28-year-old mother of two, lives in Cleveland, subscribes to the New Yorker. Now, how many of those women are there? And can brands are they limited, to that sort of tribe or that affinity group, or can they ever expand beyond that? And because I would argue that sometimes people try to expand beyond their natural affinity groups or their core culture, as you said, and that's when their CACs go through the roof and they start spending gazillion dollars trying to convince people who really don't care. But I'd be interested in hearing, maybe I've led the witness, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, the way we look at it, it's looking at some of the psychographics and behaviors that index a little bit higher. So take that Birchbox example, like 28-year-old mother of two that subscribes to the New Yorker and in Cleveland. That sparks like someone who's more curious, someone who will try new things, someone who wants to know what's going on maybe before her neighbors on that side of it. It's interesting with Birchbox, when it first launched, the cohort was really 18 to 24-year-olds, because in college, it was $10 a month. It was relatively cheap. And then girls were so excited to get this that they would do vlogs, video logs on YouTube at the time, and do the unboxing experience of what they had. Mm. And what that led to is one, other 18 to 24-year-olds seeing it, but then two, their mothers seeing it when they went home on college break. And their mothers are like, ooh, I want to know what the latest skincare is or that stuff, so I subscribe too. So it's less about age, and sometimes it's less about income, although it matters. It's about, ooh, I want to access the newest stuff first and be in the know. And so that 28-year-old is kind of like a muse towards curiosity. Sony PlayStation's target audience is like a 33-year-old father of two that wants to romance the college days when he was in his dorm. And so you don't see too many ads featuring the 33-year-old, but it's it appeals to the 18-year-old and that way. Trader Joe's has got the best muse, we think. Trader Joe's, they develop all their products and services inside the store, and they're targeting one person. It is literally like a substitute middle school teacher that drives a late model Volvo. And if you
It's
sit on
that
that, like, what does that
specific.
mean? I mean, late model Volvos out there. And it's like, so you describe someone that doesn't make a lot of money income wise, but is smart, invested in research and a teacher, but really appreciates value. Like a
Right.
Volvo is not the cheapest car, but a late model Volvo, that's like that car has been out there for 15 or 20 years. So they want quality, but they don't want to pay a lot of money for it.
Yeah.
So it's just get a sense of that. Does this product and service do that? So it's as much as psychographics on things, and that what the great thing about digital media and what happened with the onset of, we'll say, Yahoo and Google and Facebook and things like that is before mass media was all based on a demographic. It
Right.
was all about who got the most 18 to 49 year olds, and the NBC wanted to win that 18 to 49 year old. Well, now because we can target more, I think we've lost the plot a little bit, and so that's why we try to go by indices of certain elements of it. And those muses from those brands I mentioned are kind of like plugways towards it. So yes, media targets are helpful on there, and when we look outside of it, like if we're selling, say, a lamp like Peloton very early, you had to target people that had a little bit more household income because it was $2,000 product and it was new. That's
Right.
why there was a heavy amount of CNBC advertising. Then over the course of time, this Peloton was equating with, like, for instance, a 42-year-old mom of three in Grand Rapids who literally cried because Peloton helped her lose 30 pounds and stay in better shape so she could be a better mom. And she
Right.
did that at a homecoming event for Peloton. So, like, numbers are so helpful. This is why I think data driven is one of the most overused terms out there. We prefer data informed. At the end of the day, great brands have human characteristics, and brands have to have values and certain behaviors on it. So it's like data informed is so key. But sometimes we can get too golden calf worshipping
Right.
of the numbers, a la
Right.
CAC.
How does a brand know that they've nailed the muse?
That's a great question in terms of nailing the muse, because it can evolve over time too. It's just like center in. And listen, if you're a scaling business, you might have multiple muses. Like there
Got
was
it.
a vitamin and supplement store that had two muses. One was a 26-year-old guy that worked out a lot, who who did a lot of self tanning and was always posing in the mirror. And the other muse was literally a 53-year-old grandma of two who wanted fish oil and just like stuff so she could lift her grandkid,
Yeah.
both from a vitamins and supplement store. So not it doesn't have to be so singular depending on what the nature of what you do and sell, but it's like you do need a center of gravity on terms of who's most perpetual. Now that said, there are legions of stories, especially in vitamins and supplements. Talk about high gross margins, where the number of brands that have like launched and gone to 100 million in 3 years is astronomical. And quite often, if you look at their biggest, I'll say it in this case, expense, it'll be marketing. They'll spend 60 or 65 million in marketing behind that 100 million
Yeah.
because that's the biggest cost, because the ingredients are so cheap on that
Right.
side of it. So they're not anti-digital acquisition. It's gotten way too celebrated. It's like we don't
Right.
send third graders to school to only learn um, social studies. You learn math. You learn all those things too. So to do a well-rounded marketing is almost the same way to educate a
Yeah.
third grader.
Yeah. Well, sort of tangent to that, what? How do you define a brand? What does brand mean to you?
Yeah, a brand, it's a set of values. It's what people say about you when you leave the room. And in many ways, it's got human characteristics. And I think a lot of people in the early stage space will um, confuse it with branding, which is like visual identity and color schemes and logos. That's branding. Those are elements. A brand is a set of values. So if I were to describe someone using brands, you could probably get a feel for that person. So if I say Sam Adams Beer, Volkswagen, Visa, Timberland, Patagonia, then I describe Levi's. I describe another person, Mercedes, Perrier, Tommy Hilfiger. The first person you're probably picturing like a younger guy like in Vermont with like stubble and everything that's outdoorsy. The other person you're picturing playing tennis and doing that. So that's what brands have the power to do. And
Yeah.
when I do some of these exercises with the Wall Street types who tend to be very left-brained, very talented, very rich, but very left-brained, I'll say, okay, what's brand? All right, I'm going to give you a car. What car do you want? Do you want a BMW or a Kia? Well, BMW. Why? Well, it's the better car. I haven't even showed it to you yet. I haven't even described it.
Yeah.
So a brand is also a promise that it's like a brand was invented back in like thousands of years ago in Mesopotamia when beer was being sold. Like, how do I know that beer is fresh versus others? And there was like a branding, like you put on a calf and a cow, and that they were putting that on the side of these oak barrels. So it was a promise of quality. McDonald's, which is a huge brand. When you see it on a highway, I trust them to stop that highway, and I know what I'm going to get
Right.
on there for it. So it's a promise set of values. So very squishy. It's like everyone at home thinking, "Oh, this guy's a liberal arts guy." Okay, whatever. But that's what it really is soul. Then there's the branding elements, which get into color schemes, visual identities, and systems,
Right.
and all that. We do that, but brand is far more powerful than branding. Branding is one of many ways to kind of show what that brand stands for.
But when you're in early stage, let's say, somebody that you're getting involved with, it's not the Nike, the or even a Peloton at this stage. What, how do people even know what you stand for? I mean, how do you communicate that promise to people, and that people then can identify, like, yeah, I'm that type of person. I buy and use that product. Like,
we have a phrase that we love: "Be it, don't say it." And there's certain things you could advertise and say it. Like if I were going to advertise Bullish and me, I'm going to say great things because guess what? I have a house and everything that relies on the health of Bullish, right? But in terms of like, in terms of what it stands for, it's the actions. Like, does Bullish really invest in consumer disruptive startups? And it's like, okay, if I describe what Bullish is and what we do functionally, it's like, okay. Then when I tell you we're the first investor in Peloton and Casper and Harry's and Sunday Lawn, and we're a top 5% fund from 2011 to 2015, top 15% from there on out. Like, oh, okay. Then it's validation along those lines too. So actions speak louder than words. And one of the things that we love about being early stage is if you do brand and operationalize it well, you can spend less money on marketing and advertising. Because like when you have a strong brand positioning and brand strategy, it should be reflected in the products or services you sell, the website, the partners you have, the customer service. If you really care for me as a customer, you better pick that phone and not put me on hold for 2 hours. CRM and loyalty, get feedback from me. The very last thing is marketing and advertising. That is to propel and fan more flames and get more of this kind of your core customers. Like, let's go find more of them on there. So that's a great thing, like brand when operationalized, and where there's just such a big disconnect with big companies, which is why people hate advertising people. Like, you sell me things I don't want. Well, if you're General Motors or you're Coca-Cola, it's hard just to change the formula of something that may not work. Use advertising to find the good and celebrate a certain thing. Like, that doesn't taste well. Well, it's sugar-free. I don't really like it all. Well, it's got no calories in it. Well, it doesn't really go fast or get that good gas mileage. Well, look at that rearview mirror. So you celebrate the good when you advertise it. But brand strategy, when brand strategy and business strategy like are in harmony, it's amazing. And you see that in the form of like Tesla and Apple and many other things. And it's sometimes hard to do. It's hard to put a spine inside the cheetah that's running. And so for early stage companies, they show signs of it. Our job is to help them commercialize it. So what's in a founder's gut, in his or her gut, like how do we make sure that when you hire 40 people, they're all saying, here's what Peloton stands for, or Sunday Lawn stands for, or Haley Hair stands for. So that's why we try and help them do. But the center of gravity of that brand comes from that passionate and paranoid founder. And our job is just to help bring it to life.
Yeah.
So when that founder can't be everywhere, hiring every single person, developing every product, it's still in the DNA of the company. So important. So important.
Is there a test of brand? Is there a test to know, or metrics to understand if a D2C has a good brand versus an exceptional brand?
There's various. Probably the most popular one, which has been slightly bastardized the past couple of years, is Net Promoter Score. What is the likelihood that you would recommend this brand to a friend? So when you get those emails at home, on a scale of 0 to 10, what would you say about brand X? Or on would you give 1 to 5 stars? And you'll start seeing some leading the witness. Like it'll start with a 5-star and like click here. So there's versions of that. There's other versions in like tests, especially with DTC. If you're say a clothing company and you sell products that are $40, and all of a sudden you raise prices by $5, and your conversion goes down. You may not have a strong enough brand. You are price sensitive, and that is the scariest place to be. Is like if you're really at the mercy of price. A brand is something that, when done well and is strong enough, it loyalizes customers that no matter what, like, you know what, I'm going to stay brand loyal.
Right.
So in the case of a recession, which at the time of this taping, Lord knows if we're going into that or inflationary thing, it is amazing what consumers will change out, but they will absolutely stay loyal to. People go to more private label food in stores,
Right.
like turkey behind the deli. Like, I'll do the store turkey, not the boar's head.
Right.
I'll do this kind of refreshment versus that. I'll go to that yogurt because it's 10 for 10 this week, not the one I usually go to. But things related to pets and kids, unmistakable. And toilet paper. People will maybe go for they're not going to skip on their Charmin, if you will, and I'll leave it at that. Maybe why, but people are brand loyal to a point. But it's interesting because it's not just an economic element. You know, we see people who have a lot of wealth. They'll go to like the fancy department stores to this day and get like custom and expensive like clothing, but they'll go shopping at Costco.
Right.
Because they know they want that Charmin, just to keep that Charmin up, the Charmin toilet paper, but they'll get a better value there, and they work hard to get that money. So you can't always judge consumer behavior just by the amount of money they make. Sorry for the coughing.
Yeah.
You can't always judge consumer behavior by the money they make.
So it does. So there's Net Promoter Score, but there's it sounds like an interesting test that founders could run is price sensitivity. Look at their data or test price sensitivity to see how strong their brand is. It sounds also like repeat purchase rate could be a test of brand. You know, if you have, in this economy in particular, if you really start seeing your repeat purchase rates falling off, like, geez, maybe I don't have the brand that I thought I did. Whereas if you are seeing it stays stable, like that could be a huge selling point for you down the road, you know, with investors or an acquirer.
Yeah, and listen, there's rules of thumb along the way too. Like in the case of the $40 apparel, like, you know what, you might be serving like a certain kind of portion of the market, and that's okay.
Right.
But it is easier to go from a higher price to a lower price than the other way around. Like if BMW or Audi launched in the U.S. with like a $30,000 car, they wouldn't have permission to sell you a $90,000 car.
Right.
So what they've done over time is they might have like the gateway drug version of the 3 Series, but it's like ultimately you one day want to get the 5 Series on that side. So it all depends where you are in someone's life, but it's more and more. It's like it's sacrilegious on one part to me is because the abundance of choice that we now have, brand loyalty, the atrophy is happening on a quicker scale than ever. And when you have things like inflation go up, it's just loyalty only goes so far as like my wallet will allow it to. So there's so many factors that go in, but the more you know who your customer is, the more you can really make sure that you keep that meaningful, I hate to say relationship. I don't know if I want to have a relationship with my Charmin toilet paper, for instance. Like, you know, there's an exchange value there, but in terms of like different categories, it's just like if you do right by the consumer and didn't just like lure that consumer in by like some sort of cheap deal or digital acquisition thing, and really look for that LTV mindset and to keep customers, you'll probably be healthier outside of just the leaky bucket that we talked about earlier. But you also have like a more stable, sound base that can weather moments in time, whether it's the economy or cold weather or what have you. But so many different things as we learned the past couple of years can affect that stuff, right?
Yeah. So, can the brand lose the affinity of its core group as it tries to expand the size of its addressable audience?
Absolutely. I mean, it's scale is a wonderful thing until it's not. And so in some cases, like we invest in B2C businesses and a lot of D2C business. We like paying customers. You've seen maybe communities that just like, let's just get as many people as possible and then figure out how to make money later.
Yeah.
And then when you figure out how to make money, like we're going public, it's like, oh, all of a sudden the service or the proposition is not as good.
Right.
You might lose users along those lines. Or it's like if you get someone in like 6 months for $1, are you keeping that customer after it goes to like $10 a month on that side of it? And listen, you sometimes have strong brands that all of a sudden like reach its apex. Netflix. Netflix has been a pretty strong proposition, right? But then at a time where they reach either market saturation, coupled with inflation and people making choices, it's like, are you indispensable? And that's a time I think we're living through now. Are you indispensable to me, or can I cancel you? And
Right.
all of a sudden, you're seeing maybe changes in business model. Ooh, maybe we can't go out and just do all the Adam Sandler, Jennifer Aniston content series anymore, and
Yeah.
that side. So, um, or you just flat out do wrong by the customer. In some cases, customers catch wind like, "Hey, I'm a loyal paying customer. Why is that new person at the gym paying like $10 a month and I'm paying 30 and I've been here for 5 years?" So there is something inherent in the model. Like when we acquire customers, like we treat them disproportionately better from a price standpoint than someone who's got loyal members.
Right.
Um, and it's just interesting when you look at like loyalty programs or lack thereof. Is this really a loyalty program or is it a discount program? For instance, I'm a big fan of Dunkin' Donuts. I am too good of a fan of Dunkin' Donuts. Their app is phenomenal, and there's a loyalty program that every time I get 200 points, I get a free beverage. And
Yeah.
I haven't seen their latest earnings, but there's something like people like me are like 32% more valuable to Dunkin' Donuts than people who don't have the app. So loyalty could be that, and I feel like, ooh, they give me stuff and specials when I need it. Or is it buy 5 loaves of bread, get the next one free? It's a discount program. You
Right.
might see it at your local coffee store and everything, which your local coffee store, technically D2C, doesn't have to be just on the internet, it's direct sales. So it's a lot of things come in the equation. Like in a lot of times it could be the economics, or if you just flat out start not serving your customer well.
Right.
Lululemon did this pretty infamously twice in their history, where all of a sudden, what became the almost um, unofficial outfit of moms picking up their children in grade school, all of a sudden they literally came across quality issues
Yeah.
and had recalls. And so there was a number of people that abandoned the brand, which gave others like Gymshark and others permission to come to the category. So, um, but the consumers now in a DTC world, in a social media world, will evangelize and like will preach to the heavens if they're wronged. Not as much as they're right, but they will do it if they're right. They'll recommend other people.
Yeah.
But that's you have to be careful of. So brands, if you take your customer for granted, you can lose her.
Yeah.
You can lose her.
Yeah. Absolutely. We're entering an incredibly difficult, period. I think for a lot of founders, particularly younger founders who haven't lived through anything remotely similar to this. What are you telling your founders now?
Well, it's the great thing about investing as early as we do is companies are coming out of the womb in a post-COVID, post-iOS 14 world. And yes, there's inflation, so there's not a lot of bone to chip or change and everything. There's cartilage, and so I'm going to go on a rant here. So I'm going to apologize and feel free to edit this out. It's amazing how many venture capitalists have come out of the woodwork saying, "Have 30 months of runway, do all these things." Where 6 months ago they weren't saying that. They're like, "Take my money, let's have an up round, let's keep going." So there's been a lot of quote unquote sober wisdom from venture capitalists that like, thanks, buddy. Where was this like 6 months ago before this
Yeah,
all started?
where am I getting the
So
24 months of runway now?
so exactly. It's what kills me is there's a lot of wisdom being bespoken. We don't try to overly help or get in the way of one of our entrepreneurs. Our job is to be that personal trainer. Our job is to make sure you're in shape. Our job is to make sure to like you keep you on your plan and everything like that. But ultimately, you're the athlete, and we're betting on you, and we put money into it because we believe in you, and we want to be supportive in some way, shape, or form. But on one hand, as much as I mention all the great companies, the Pelotons, the Warby Parkers, and the Harrys, we don't want to be like LeBron James's second grade teachers saying like, yeah, we're the ones that made LeBron a great superstar. Like we're in the presence there. When you meet some of the founders that we have, whether it's like a Coulter Lewis at a Sunday, or it was Katya at Birchbox, or Nicola Claire and many others, it's really amazing how the entrepreneurs make us really, really smart. And if they really are as passionate about serving the customer and paranoid, that paranoia isn't just a nice marketing thing out of my mouth. They're acting that way.
Right.
We had businesses when the pandemic was starting, which is the best comp, that one business said like, you know what, we might lay off 15% of our staff. Wound up laying off 22% because they wanted to cut once and cut a little bit deeper, versus multiple cuts because they didn't want to lose the culture.
Right.
And that it was a good thing that they did it. It was probably a little bit harsher than they needed to, but they loyalized and kept the people that were there and didn't lose anybody else from a voluntary basis. And then they went back to growth something like 4 months later.
Wow.
And that side of it. So we advise in certain things, but it's just like what it keeps coming down to is some of the fundamentals. If you keep and take care of your current customers, that can be a thing that pays back. And so many times as VCs and even entrepreneurs, we love subscription businesses because it's recurring revenue. That recurring revenue is coming from the pockets of people.
Right.
And you know what? You've got to make sure, especially in a world that there's not only with what's going on with inflation, but fraud is an all-time high. A lot of people have to get new credit cards and they have to go re-enter it. So it's like there's even new degrees of, I'll say, invisible friction that can come to the equation. That if you're not serving someone at the right time and they happen to have to cancel all the credit cards in her or his wallet, are you going to get that call back? Are you going to get that entry?
Right.
And that's why you have to just keep doing it. So you can't skimp, and you cannot take loyalty for granted. But a lot of times we look at these things like subscriptions, we look at business models. Business models are great, but they don't exist without customers that are getting some sort of value. And that's one of those things that's, dare I say, timeless. But, any of the things that we're saying now, it's just more of don't expect to be able to raise capital as easily as before. I think alternative means of capital are going to come in vogue, and certainly credit and debt have become much cooler since 2019 because there's a lot more viable ways of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
With interest rates going up, that'll be interesting how that maintains serve. But it's just, if you have a strong and viable business, you will have options. But you have to stay paranoid and do it. And growth at every option, that has been celebrated. That is not being celebrated right now.
Yeah.
I suspect we don't learn from history, like post midterm elections or a presidential election 2024, who knows? Promises. But like for the time being, like the more paranoid you act on for the health of your business, the better shot you have to thrive while others do not.
My last question sort of dovetails to that. Like, the paranoia, as I'm hearing it, in my mind, and this is obviously because I'm very influenced by this, but like, it manifests itself in some form of like financial discipline or understanding of the business, right? Like the example you just gave where that founder was like, we could cut 15, but we're going to cut 22. Like, that part of that was emotional, but also it was really driven by like, geez, I think we'd be better off, by saving that extra money. So I guess my question is like, what do you think founders are good enough in their financial acumen or management, or is that tend to be a weak spot for them? And if so, what can they do about it?
Yeah, it's either too strong of a spot for some that over rely on like digital acquisition for marketing that can be too strong, or naive and don't know enough about it, and that's okay, because like great business leaders and CEOs can come in all shapes and sizes. What's great about what's going on, and since when we started investing, like a Bainbridge didn't exist. So now there's different things like before a Series B, or even should I raise a Series B, you can go to a Bainbridge and in your own way, and I'm not trying to be nice to you there, Ben, but it's like a Bainbridge can help be that personal trainer to pressure test, am I running my business as soundly as possible? Let me get a pressure test on that. And there's a number of solutions that have come up, and Bainbridge is certainly like leading that pack on that side of it. So in terms of really saying, are we doing everything as efficiently as possible? How can we get better? So those have come. So, and that could be for someone who is hypersensitive and has got that CFO mindset, or for somebody else that maybe can't spell CFO, but relies on somebody else to do that for them. Or in most cases, quite frankly, they don't have a CFO.
Yeah.
And it's like a CFO will come like post Series A or Series B. And so something like a Bainbridge can be super useful in terms of like, okay, providing the rigor of like a personal training CFO to kind of come in and look at what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, and to expose certain things. So that's the great thing. There's more tools, because clearly for all the mockery that direct-to-consumer has gotten, is done pretty well, because there's a number of new providers that didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago that are doing pretty well as a result, yourself included. So that's one of the things that's out there. But listen, if a CFO can better serve a customer in some sort of consumer area, sign us up. but it doesn't have to be a must have.
Yeah.
It's not a deficiency certainly, but it's good to see that this period of time, like there's other ways of doing it just besides a human capital. And it's like if you get that CFO hire wrong or COO hire wrong, now there's like other parties that can come in and
Right.
kind of what we do in marketing. You certainly do on the e-commerce diligence side. That's why I think it's a good time, and there's more guardrails in a good way for paranoid minded founders that want to make sure they're on the path to be great.
I love that. Thank you for those nice words. But I also love like this image of the paranoid, in the right way, the good way, founder.
Yeah.
Mike, we're at time. Was there anything I missed or that you want to make sure, and we can cut it in later?
Long live consumer. And I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast, you must like consumer DTC. What fascinates us is if you look at the U.S. GDP, just under 70% of it is consumer spending, discretionary or otherwise. And so for all the talk of SaaS multiples and all this stuff, we tend to salivate over like the multiples and everything like that. Consumer brand loyalty is eroding. There's more stuff coming to play. So DTC consumer are, I'll say it, very viable, and there's a lot of play here. And we certainly know that 70% of VC money is not going towards consumer propositions. So there's a lot of room for future innovation. It's happening now. There's too many damn smart people that during the pandemic said, why is this done a certain way? Or should I stay at my big corporate job? So I think we're on the doorstep of a golden era of a new type of DTC and consumer solutions. So buckle up, Ben and listeners. There's some fun ahead. Not going to be easy, but, there's some fun ahead.
Hallelujah. All right. Thanks, Mike. That was awesome.